In August, the UK Prime Minister Jerry Smith...
We in the Labour Party are committed to the safety and security of our Israeli partners. Please don't be upset.
...threatened to recognise Palestine as a state should Israel refuse to hold a ceasefire. Incredibly, despite Starmer's tough, man-of-steel tactics...
Oh, please, enough is enough.
Israel didn't acquiesce to these demands and has continued its brutal genocide. I mean, arguably, it's actually escalated through its ground assault on Gaza City, the decimation of healthcare facilities, and the famine which has reached beyond a, quote, point of no return for many people. Simultaneously, despite the threat of recognition, then Foreign Secretary David Lammy released a letter declaring that the UK government denies that Israel is committing genocide and therefore the UK can continue to supply parts for the F-35 jets sold to Israel to directly conduct its genocidal operations and international assassinations, and also continue to share intelligence to facilitate the genocide.
Are you a war criminal, David Lammy? Why are we, if you think there is a genocide, then why are we still selling arms to Israel? Why are we still sharing intelligence? We've got British spy flights going over Gaza from RAF Akatiri. No comment?
Embarrassingly, I guess legally for the British government, a week later, the UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, released a report finding that Israel has indeed been committing genocide, failing to prevent genocide, and that alongside Netanyahu, Prime Minister Isaac Herzog is guilty of incitement to genocide. And I mention these points specifically because it throws into obvious question whether the UK is itself guilty under the Genocide Convention for failing to prevent genocide by continuing to sell parts of F-35 jets and by hosting Herzog in mid-September.
Why are we, if you think there is a genocide, then why are we still selling arms to Israel?
Now, of course, anyone who's familiar with me or my channel knows that, of course, the UK is directly responsible for facilitating the genocide, regardless of what a legal body may say. But while it continues to facilitate this genocide, the UK government has also followed through on its threat to recognise Palestinian statehood alongside Canada, Australia and France.
In the face of the growing horror in the Middle East, we are acting to keep alive the possibility of peace and a two-state solution. That means a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state.
So we're in the absurd position that the UK government recognises the state of Palestine without recognising the genocide of Palestinians. And this raises the obvious question of, what's the fucking point? So in this video, I'm going to give a very brief analysis of why I think this dynamic of recognition while facilitating genocide is deeper than just a political distraction of the Labour government, which is trying desperately to attempt to rescue its abysmal popularity amongst key voting demographics. Instead, I think that this circumspect, this conditional recognition is part of a long-standing colonial tactic of control. It's a cunning recognition. In Glenn Coulthard's incredible book, Redskins, White Masks, he traces the ways in which the recognition of Indigenous nations by the liberal and neoliberal Canadian settler state was not a moment of conditional progress, but a change in the form of settler colonialism. Coulthard argues that through the kind of technocratic, liberal politics of recognition, the dominant position of the settler state is not eroded, but bolstered, while Indigenous nations are further subjectified as subordinate to the settler authority. It's still the settler state who is the ultimate authority in deciding when and how to recognise Indigenous nationhood, and the conditions of recognition are on further assimilation within settler politics, whether through opening land to capitalist development or by accepting the transformation of Indigenous politics from liberation from the colonial settler state to recognition by the settler state. Now, there are some immediate and obvious parallels, as well as some immediate and obvious differences between this analysis of Canadian settler colonialism and the recognition of Palestine. One obvious difference is that Israel and Zionists are furious about recognition and have used it as a pretense to further expand military land grabs in the West Bank.
Well, the Israeli government has responded about as violently as imaginable. A close associate of Prime Minister Netanyahu accused the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer of being a new Chamberlain who is now defending the new Nazis. That's a quote. So as to prevent there being an Islamic invasion of Britain. Prime Minister Netanyahu is basically going to DC to try and get an okay from President Trump about annexing or declaring sovereignty over certain territories of the occupied West Bank.
The recognition of Palestine as a state is intolerable because it goes against the colonial frontier rhetoric of a land without a people for a people without a land. Therefore, this form of recognition can't be seen as an assimilation into the Zionist nation state, but it can be seen as an attempt to assimilate an acceptable face of Palestinian liberation into the so-called international community while leaving intact the material conditions of Israeli domination which make true statehood impossible. That is, it constructs an ideal of Palestinian national liberation into an international system still defined by imperialism and colonialism, an international system which labels any violent resistance to Israel colonialism as inherently illegitimate, which views Hamas as the governing structure of Gaza as inherently illegitimate, and which maintains the legitimacy of Israel as a settler state regardless of Israel's recognition of Palestine. This kind of recognition is grounded in trying to weekend at Bernie's the dead so-called two-state solution as the only path towards Palestinian liberation. For example, the official Palestinian mission to the UK released a statement just the other day reaffirming the Palestinian Authority's commitment to a two-state solution and a lasting peace alongside the Zionist state. That is, a peace which legitimizes the existence of Israel on historic Palestine. There's a phrase within human rights literature called cunning recognition, which refers to the ways in which certain groups are granted rights on the condition that they are assimilated into dominant structures. For example, indigenous communities around the world are often granted land rights by settler states. But in doing so, indigenous land relations are transformed from often stewardship relations into essentially property rights, and as such, land is opened up to the market for development. Cunning recognition is another way of conceptualizing this process of apparent progress, which actually just reaffirms the authority of the colonial power, or indeed, colonial powers. And in this context, it's essential to remember that the Oslo Accords in the 1990s, which established the Palestinian Authority and codified the division between the West Bank and Gaza, as well as the formal fracturing of the West Bank among different levels of formal control, has been an essential mechanism through which Israel has legalized and legitimized its settler economic and political domination.
This handshake was the hope of peace between Palestine and Israel. And this is what the map was supposed to look like. But this is the reality. The Oslo Accords that defined the end of the occupation in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank were signed in 1993. It was the moment that the Palestinian Liberation Organization recognized the State of Israel, and Israel recognized the PLO.
The Oslo Accords split the West Bank into three areas A, B and C, where Area A formally falls under Palestinian Authority administrative control, though of course this control is always conditional, as the military and economic jackboot remains thoroughly on the PA's throat. It contains just over half the population of the West Bank's population, about 55%, and about 18% of its land area. Area B is under Palestinian Authority's civil administration, but formally under Israeli state security domination. It holds about 40% of the population and 20% of the land area. It's why going in and out of the West Bank, checkpoints are operated by the Israeli military. It's why when Louis Theroux was doing his latest documentary in the West Bank, he was asked about why he's coming to Israel, and he pointed out that he was actually still in Palestine.
At the edge of the city, we were held up at one of the many checkpoints that control the people entering and leaving.
How much time you gonna stay in Israel?
Hang on, but I don't think we're in Israel.
Huh?
Are we in Israel?
You're in Israel now?
Are we?
Yes.
In the
No?
West Bank? No?
Security control within Palestine, authorised by the Oslo Accords. And it holds about 40% of the population and 20% of the land area. Areas A and B are surrounded by Area C, by settlements, and by Israeli military infrastructure. And Area C is completely controlled by Israel. It covers just 5% of the Palestinian population, but 61% of the land area, including the most abundant areas of natural resources and arable farmland. Obviously, this is area which is ready-made to accept settlers, which are, of course, against international law, but Israel doesn't give a fuck. So you can see how the Oslo Accords, while granting international legitimation to the PA as an administrative body, not a state, an administrative body, also secured the effective control of land and resources in Palestine. It was a cunning recognition of the PA and of the West Bank as an area. It was a recognition dependent on a peace process and towards a two-state solution.
The Accords aimed to set up the Palestinian Authority as an interim government. That interim government was supposed to transform into a permanent one after the Palestinian Independent State was established in Gaza in the West Bank by 1999.
But the problem of recognition stretched even further. In 1994, Israeli economic domination of Palestine was legalised via the Paris Protocols, which were an economic protocol of the Oslo Accords, a kind of additional treaty on top of them. The protocols essentially formalised the economic domination of Palestine through its dependency on Israel, transforming it legally from a condition of occupation to one of internationally legally recognised trade regulation. And all the while, Palestinian resistance was pacified, in the words of Dana in this excellent collected edition of the political economy of Palestine. And we can understand this pacification as a case of cunning recognition, as PA acquiescence to Israeli domination was bought via the massive influx of international donors and NGOs who initiated so-called peace-building programs of economic development and state building. Massive amounts of aid flooded into Palestine, directed in certain ways not to end Israeli occupation, but to stabilise and maintain Zionist domination. Such massive levels of aid reflected the strategic and geopolitical significance of the occupied Palestinian territory in donor states' agendas, within which the overriding priority is to enforce stability and reduce the likelihood of uprisings and violent confrontations. Since donor intervention is often conditioned by Israeli security needs and disregards the ongoing colonization on the ground, donor assistance is intended to mitigate the devastating effects of Israeli colonial policies and practices. So the creation of the PA and the Oslo Accords allowed the occupation of Palestine to be effectively assimilated within networks of legitimate, liberal, NGO power. It recognised Zionist authority over the entirety of the economy and effectively granted total control over Palestine. It created an acceptable face of resistance defined by its commitment to the road towards the two-state solution. It's a face of economic development and international law, and it's a road that Bugs Bunny might paint on a solid wall and get you to run headfirst at. This absurd colonial condition was the price for the recognition of the PA as a legitimate authority. These conditions, this cunning recognition, are what led Edward Said to compare the Oslo Accords to appeasement. Let us call the agreement by its real name: an instrument of Palestinian surrender, a Palestinian Versailles.
But also because I believe that decisions made, mostly represented by the Declaration of Principles in Oslo that was signed on the White House lawn in September of last year, were tremendous mistakes. They were diversions from liberation, and in fact, the leadership represented by Yasser Arafat of the PLO had put itself in the position of accepting a role that was subordinate to Israel, that the PLO would become the enforcer of the occupation since the Israelis were going to remain. Their army, their settlements, and so on, with tragic results that we saw in Hebron on February the 25th, and many others like that. And B, because I think the Palestinian leadership under Yasser Arafat also thought that by making this deal secretly with Israel, they would save themselves. And I felt they completely disregarded the interest of the large mass of the people, 50% of whom don't live in Palestine, are stateless refugees in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and so on. And I think instead of it as they represent it as being an important achievement, I think it was a tremendous capitulation.
And indeed, despite the recognition, Israel has never stopped deepening its control, its killing and its dispossession of Palestinians, and making a mockery of the concept of a two-state solution. How do you create a two-state solution when one state is willing and eager to continue to commit genocide against the other? On the 25th anniversary of the Oslo Accords, one policy roundup noted that after a quarter of a century, a sovereign Palestinian state remained out of reach while Israel's settler colonial project had significantly expanded.
أتوقع أن أوسلو هي كانت محاولة لعودة المقاومة الفلسطينية وعودة الثورة الفلسطينية لفلسطين. بس اللي بلمس على الأقل كشاب في عشرينيات من عمره اللي بيحلم مثلا بتحرير فلسطين وبيحلم بالتخلص من الاحتلال وبيحلم بكل هاي الأمور، بيشوف إنه كانت أوسلو نوع من أنواع يعني كعقبة أمام تحرير الدولة الفلسطينية وتحريرها من الاحتلال.
So, returning to Britain's flaccid recognition of Palestine, while it's certainly true that part of the Labour government's political calculation to recognise Palestine as a state was to buy off certain segments of voting blocs who have become increasingly hostile to genocidal appeasement, while at the same time doing precisely nothing to actually stop the genocide. It's also true that recognition like this is a tool to further embed a particular construction of Palestinian liberation within networks of international colonial power, which is to say that the Labour government's recognition of Palestinian statehood isn't just flaccid, it's cunning. Okay, once again, thanks for watching. For people who are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Give the video a share if you enjoyed it, you thought it was useful, you thought it clarified some stuff. So you can always subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Patreon if you really wish, where you get early access to videos, you get all the scripts for the videos, and you get access, $5 and up, patrons get access to a Discord server. You can also send a one-off donation via PayPal or Ko-fi. $5 and up patrons also get their names read out in the credits, so I will just do that now for them. Demo Squid, Dying of Thirst, Soval Hayes, Anita Anisby, Bon, Cameron Blakemore, Daniel Swing, Earl Grey T, Ellis Wren, FD Signifier, Hey Joe, Joshua Moldenhauer, Kim Crawley, Nina G Public Relations, S, Tom Hutton, Unoriginal Name, Aga Ghost, Aaron, Alex, Barney Carroll, Cade Soiree, Christopher Poff, Daniel Hughes, Duncan Skinner, Esoteric Fictionalism, Eugene K, J. Fraser Cartwright, Jack, Jacob Kinshenker, Joel Girengor, Layum, Mason Colbert, Melanie Estes Margussi, Nelly Zacheva, Niels Abildgaard, Paul Singleton, Via Westphal, Rachel Ann, Rachel Mixon, Robin, Tamash Kispeter, TB Skyan, Tim, Tinfoil Pancakes, Tom Price, and Xander Corvus. Is that right? That is right. Okay. That was in a different order than it normally comes up on my little thing. That's the $10 and up patrons. By the way, I think I said $5 and up. $5 and up get their names in the patrons, $10 and up get read out. That sort of thing. Once again, if you thought this was a good video and you'd like to see more, please do like and subscribe and share and comment and all that stuff. Once again, thank you very much for watching and love you. Bye.